call the meeting to order. I'd like to begin by acknowledging we're in Treaty 1 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. On the panel today is Ms. Tracy Anderson. I'm Stu McPherson. I'll be chairing the hearing. At a later date, Mr. Brent McIntyre may be joining us. He's in another hearing now, so he may or may not be joining us later. The assessors for today's hearing are Mr. Matthew Harling and Mr. David Penner. And the secretary for today's hearing is Ms. Katie Sutherland. We'll be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application. We'll limit discussion to those matters. The statements that applicants or the assessor make at this hearing are sworn testimony. Anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Please be advised that the comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council. It's independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I'll confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We'll then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they so wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave, and the process will repeat for each item on the docket. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You'll receive the order by registered mail as soon as possible. Just as information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. Have you swear the parties in, please?
So you can affirm or you can swear in the Bible. Okay, so please state your name.
Matthew Russell Harlan.
And you swear that the evidence you're about to present is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Okay. State your name.
David Thomas George Penner.
Do you swear that the evidence you're about to present is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. So would you like to swear or affirm?
Lawrence.
Okay.
Bradford Scott Borgstrom.
Do you swear that the evidence you're about to present is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
This is where we're going to
Okay.
these two, and then these three. Afternoon, Mr. Bertram.
Good afternoon. Just as a quick matter, I understand that we rearranged the ordering and that we'll be dealing with two different individuals here. My questioning on the first one, I'm going to assume can extend and carry forward through all of the properties on this docket. I will ask, I guess the Matthew to jump in if he disagrees with any of the answers that Mr. Penner gives, in the interest of trying to expedite things a little bit.
Okay, rather than having to jump in when you're questioning Mr. Penner, if perhaps you could just say
on his
questions
first one.
asked and answered to Mr. Harling, and if he disagreed with any of those answers, he can answer accordingly.
Sure.
Okay, so let's do it that way. You're representing the owners of 7 properties on the docket today,
I believe that's correct.
and it's just the amount of the assessed value that we're dealing with today?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So, the first property we'll begin with is 200 Bagan. So, I understand that's you, Mr. Penner?
Yes, it is.
When you're
Thank
ready,
you,
please.
Mr. Chairman. So the roll number here is 0605311130. The property is 200 Bagan Avenue in St. Boniface. This is a building that was built in 2 phases. One, the original building in 2001, and it was added on to in 2005. The effective year built is 2003. The wall height of the structure is 27 feet, and it is zoned M2. The rest of the pertinent details are here on page 1. And the value in the roll for 2020 is $16,368,000. Turning to page 2 of my brief, you can see that the request for income information were complied with by the owner of the property. There was a sale on it representing the bare land back in 2000, so not really relevant here. There is a subject property lease in place. The tenant here is Color Ad Packaging Limited. The lease start date is November the 1st, 2015. And they have 136,101 square feet at a net rent of $7.91. Of note, we've been the tenant here since the beginning, and there's been no vacancy in this property since 2002. Turning to page 3 of my brief, we have some comparison properties, looking for properties of similar size. To the subject property, we have 3 listed here, ranging from $5.17 a square foot to $8.15 a square foot. And we believe that supports our model rent. Turning to page 4 is the income workup on the subject property as shown here. Again, the leasable area is 136,101 square feet. Our model rent on this is $765 for a potential rent of $1,041,173. Of note, the model rent is slightly less than the actual rent in place, but it is a model-driven value, and we believe $765 is appropriate. So going down, we have a potential rent of $1,041,173. To that, we've applied a vacancy loss of 2.5%. This is the vacancy that we've determined in this particular area of Winnipeg, the east sector. Vacancy in this area we found has come down significantly from the previous cycle. Driving that decrease in vacancy was a large property sale, that being 1 Warman Road, which was 120,000 square feet of vacant area that was purchased and is now occupied. So taking that out of the market, we found that the actual vacancy for the area was in around 2.5%. So deducting the market vacancy of 2.5% or $26,029, we have an effective gross income of $1,015,144. To that, we're deducting 2% for non-recoverables. I'll just speak to that briefly. That amounts to $20,303. This is an area that we differ from Altus and other agents, as you are aware, who are thinking 2% plus 5% is more appropriate. The difference is Altus, I'll speak to Altus in particular here. They deduct items such as leasing commissions, tenant inducements, tenant improvement allowances, and free rent. We follow case law in this matter and find that those aren't deductions in determining the market value. Case law supports us in that, so we take a different position and we don't deduct those out. Having said that, our analysis of the market finds that 2% is sufficient to recover non-recoverable expenses. So moving on, we apply a shortfall rate of $375 per square foot. That's based on the vacancy area, another $12,759. Leaves us with a net operating income of $982,082. To that, we've applied a 6% cap rate. Driving the cap rate here, this is an investment grade property. As I've mentioned, there's no vacancy on this property. It hasn't been since 2002. It's a newer building with an effective age of 2003, and there's a solid long-term lease in place, further reducing risk. So we believe 6% is an appropriate cap rate here. Applying a 6% cap rate to the net operating income gives us a capitalized value of $16,368,033, as shown on page 4. Page 5 is just another look at the income value summary, but there's only one income stream, so it's the same as the previous page. Of note, the starting point is a net rent, which is net of expenses to the owner, including the cost of management. On page 6, we see our cap rate study, our cap rate tables. The cap rate at 6% is a little bit below the 20th to the 80th percentile, but falls within the overall range for this type of building, indicated there as 5.5 to 9.8%. It's within that range, and also supported by CBRE at the low end of their range, which is 6 to 6.5%. So again, we believe, given the risk profile and the age of the building, that 6% is appropriate. Page 7 is some excerpts from the Municipal Assessment Act, which pertain to the appeal process. Turning to page 8, we have some photos of the subject property. There's a good overhead view at the top of the page and some different angled views. As you can see, there's plenty of land available on this property, so the land to building ratio would be considered good. They're not using all the land that is there, so that's not a factor in this case. Page 9 are some street views of the property, as you can see there. Starting on page 10, we have the income and expense information submitted to us. Page 10 and 11, page 12 just shows us that there's one tenant, being Colorado Packaging, occupying 136,101 square feet. On page 13, you can see the tenant rent roll there, and you can see on the line Colorado Packaging Limited, you can see that the net rent is listed there at $791. On top of that, they have recoveries for operating expenses, property taxes, and other. So the effective rate is $1137. The net rent is $791. As I stated earlier, we're using a model rent of $765. On the next page, page 14, again, we just, this is an older financial statement, as we didn't receive one for 17. Just shows the rent and expenses there. Of note, there's full recovery of operating costs, management fee, and property taxes there. So this is an owner that's recovering from the tenant all of those costs. Turning to page 15 is an addenda that we've put together. It just talks about the 2020 reassessment being a fresh look at market data. Some cap rate evidence is on page 18. Now, these aren't cap rates specific to support the cap rate in this specific property. They're just examples of cap rates, actual cap rates in the market. On page 19, we have a sampling of non-recoverable expenses, and doing it in the way that we mentioned, i.e. excluding items such as leasing commissions, tenant inducements, tenant improvements, and free rent. We find that the median value for non-recoverables is 1.06. 2% is more than sufficient to cover the non-recoverables. And page 20 just talks about the IAAO standards. So to summarize, this is an investment grade property with a good solid long-term lease and a good tenant. Wall heights are 27 feet, which suit many operations, more than adequate. Full value for a 6% cap given the risk profile, and we believe the value of $16,368,000 is fair and equitable, and I ask that the board confirm the value. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bergstrom, questions for the assessor?
I do, thank you. This brief, as with your others, you are here defending the model, the city's model.
It is, yes.
And in all cases, you've applied model rents, correct?
Yes,
And model vacancy rates,
that's correct.
model cap rate.
Yes. We do have discretion to look at the actual rents in place, and we may choose to move from the model to the actual rents if we deem them to be representative of the market. So we have some discretion there, but in this case, we have a model rent in place.
Now, let's just take a quick peek at your page number 3. And here you've shown 3 rental comparables, yes?
Yes,
And isn't it true that the property on Redwood had substantial renovations, is now completely air conditioned?
that's, could be,
You don't know?
I'm not positive.
You don't know?
I can't say for certain.
Okay. Did you examine any of these leases within your briefs today to determine their accuracy, or you just
Yes,
told them
they are accurate.
based on what's been inputted into your system, right?
Yes,
And the input is done by clerks?
yeah, I've verified.
And that's
that.
fine, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just setting it up. So you indicated that the vacancy rate of 2.5% is what the model has generated for this property. You also indicated that that was partially arising from a property on Mormon Road that had been leased, yes?
That is, it's been purchased.
You said leased in your testimony.
It's been purchased with a user occupant.
Okay.
So it's off the market.
So
It's
in
not
the-
contributing to the vacancy rate
And
anymore.
fair enough. And so do you know how big that building was?
120,000 square feet.
And you indicated that that vacancy rate is for the east area. Do you know off the top of your head what region that is? Or industrial?
I'm not sure.
That's fine. So you agree
Market
with
region 2.
region 2?
Yeah.
And that region 2 includes north and east Kildonan, yes?
I don't have the map in front of me.
Would it be useful to look at it?
Just one moment.
Perhaps your
Let's see if
colleague
I have
hasn't.
it. Yeah, so it's a fairly large area.
Okay. And so just for the record, that includes north and east Kildonan? Yes?
That's correct.
Transcona?
Yep.
New St. Cotel?
Yes.
And New St. Boniface, but not Old St. Boniface, correct?
Correct.
Now, in that whole area, do you know how many square feet of industrial building are there?
I don't have that.
You indicated that the sale and removal of one Mormon had an impact on the vacancy rate.
Yes.
Can you describe how you calculated that?
Outside sources are indicating that.
Would that be including the Johnson report?
We're specifically looking at the Collier's report.
For vacancy?
Yes.
Okay, but the department does subscribe to the Johnson report, right?
I'm sure we subscribe to many.
In your experience, have you had an opportunity to examine or review a Johnson report?
I have not.
Perhaps your colleague might answer that question separately.
I have actually not seen a report.
Thank you. And Mr. Penner, you know what the Johnson report is, correct?
Yes.
And it's an independently produced, annually subscribed report of all commercial properties in Winnipeg, including some vacant land, yes?
Yes.
And he does surveys of rental rates and vacancy rates, yes?
Yes.
Including for vacancy, correct?
Yes.
turn you back to your page 3. And these are industrial comparisons that you offer as comparisons for the subject property, correct?
That's correct.
And I note that even using just area 2, there's only one rental comparable that's within that area, correct?
Could be.
So is Redwood in area 2?
No.
Is Inkster in area 2?
No.
And so then, in area 2, you have one rental comparable, correct?
Correct.
Let's turn to your page 13. And this was the rent roll provided by the owner, correct?
Yes.
In response to a section 16.1 request by the department.
Yes. Yep.
So let's take a look. And so in determining the information we can view or consider, it's what would be known by a purchaser as of the reference date, correct?
Correct.
And so when we take a look at this rent roll, and you look under the column headed rent step, do you see that?
Mm-hmm.
And you go to the second line down, you'll see there that there is a rent step effective November 1st, 2018. So this actually appearing on the April 1st, 2018 rent roll would be known by any purchaser, right?
That's correct.
And you see what that rent is there?
Yes.
And that's lower than the rent generated up to, or from January to November of 2015.
Right. However, if we are looking at post-reference material, as you are, we also note that it steps back up to $8 and then $8.50
Down the line,
Also
But-
known by.
which would be covered by a separate
But
assessment site.
we refrain from looking at post-reference material.
Well, you've already conceded that it's what's known as of the reference date, and so any purchaser of this property, April 1st of 2018, would know that the effective November 1st of 2018, the rent on this property generated would be reduced to $7.50 a square foot, correct?
That's correct.
And following that, any subsequent increase would be caught by a subsequent reassessment, correct?
Well, we're focusing on the reference date at this point.
Now, I want to turn you to your page 6. And you've already indicated that the subject property with the model-driven 6% cap rate falls below the 20th percentile. What particular factors would drive it down 34 basis points below the
I
20th
believe I
percentile?
went over that in my presentation already, but I can recap for you. This is an investment grade property with no vacancy since 2002. It's got excellent wall height, it's newer, and it has a solid lease in place. All those things playing into the low-risk nature of this property.
Okay, and so the calculation of the rates that you show on your page 6, under the 2 columns headed City of Winnipeg, are all based on model rents and not actual rents, correct?
Yes,
And so the model rents are then applied to adjusted sale prices, correct?
yes.
Do you know the basis for that time adjustment, how it was arrived at?
No, I don't.
Okay. Now, if we turn over, and I understand, or I heard you when you referred to CBRE, but if we look at the other 2 market reports, Colliers and Cushman, those are 2 other broker reports that are published annually, correct?
Yes.
And for the subject property under Colliers, you're saying that it's an investment grade property. What category would it fall under?
Under Collier's ranking system?
Yes.
Well, I can't speak for Colliers, but I would imagine it would be a single tenant A.
And that has a low of 6.5%, correct?
Yes.
And a maximum 7.25%?
Yes.
So under Collier's benchmarks, subject property should fall somewhere between 6.5 and 7.25?
According to Colliers, yes.
Okay. And in terms of the Cushman Q1 2018 report, do you know which category subject would fall under?
I would guess it's an industrial A.
A. And do you know what the rate for industrial A for Cushman is?
They indicate a range of 6.5 to 7.
And again, you would expect subject, according to Cushman, to fall between 6.5 and 7, yes?
Well, I can't speak again for Cushman,
This is your evidence.
but I can't speak for Cushman, just this is what they're indicating.
Now, you'd agree with me that as the subject property is a rented property, the owner is obligated to accept the rental income being generated and no more, correct?
Yes,
Similarly, any purchaser would be obligated to the terms of that lease, correct?
that's correct.
And that the terms of that lease would include the reduction in rent to $7.50 a square foot, correct?
And the following increase, correct.
I also want to turn you to your page 18, and here we've included a number of capitalization rates comparables. On your page 17, you indicate that it's a sample of actual sales that took place during the reference period. And for these particular cap rates, the actual rents in place were used, is that correct?
What would have been analyzed is the incomes from the year prior to the sale, or the 3 years prior to the sale.
And so help me understand here, was the calculation of these capitalization rates done in the same way that the model capitalization rates were derived?
Can you clarify the question?
For example, were the sales time adjusted?
No.
No, okay. Were the sales, or were the capitalization rates calculated on the basis of the net income in place at the time of sale?
They would have looked at the prior year to the sale, the last full year of information.
And so let me stop you there. Are you suggesting, I'm going to assume from your answers that you didn't do these.
I did not.
And so when you suggest that they look at the prior year, or earlier you indicated the prior 3 or 4 years, are they looking at the income less the expenses shown in the questionnaires, taking that net operating income to derive the cap rate?
We've
Or
been
are they,
looking at the actual net incomes as
so they're
disclosed.
looking at the net rent in place less the parameters in a similar fashion to the model calculation, correct?
We would look at the net operating income of those properties.
Let me ask you the question again. For the capitalization rate extractions shown at the bottom of your page 18, do you know if the stated cap rates were calculated on the same basis as calculated for your model net rents on page 6, where you have a net rent, you take off vacancy, you take off an expense allowance, shortfall, and arrive at a capitalization rate? Is that the methodology that was applied?
Yes.
Thank you. And those, I think, are my questions on this
Thank you.
property. Thanks.
Ms. Anderson,
I have no question.
you have no questions?
I don't know if that's good or bad.
So, I guess my first question is just a follow-up on page 18. if I read on page 17, it's talking about stabilizing. Net operating income has been developed through stabilizing owner reported income and
Right.
expense information.
Yes.
So it's not done the same way a model would do it with X number attributed to vacancy, X number attributed to non-recoverables. Is that correct? They would use actual
I'm thinking
I&E
that-
information?
Yes, and by stabilizing would mean we looked at more than 1 year.
Right.
So if we had 3 years available, we would look at 3 and not just rely on a single year. If we only had a single year, then we would use that.
Okay, so it, stop me if I'm wrong, but it would seem that these aren't done the same way as your cap rates on page 6 determination. You said they were, but,
Perhaps I misunderstood the question.
right,
By stabilizing, what I mean is we looked at multiple years. And the net incomes derived by the owners in these cases
right.
are actual net incomes.
And I may have misunderstood, but I thought the question that Mr. Borgstrom had posed to you was, were these done the same way that the model would generate them? Is that basically what you're?
That's correct, and I quite clearly heard his answer to that question.
Right, which
Yes,
is
and I believe
actually
I-
different than what
I-
I'm hearing now.
Yes, I believe I misunderstood the question.
Right,
We looked at actual reported incomes, and those incomes are net of the property owner's vacancy. So vacancy was applied where there was vacancy, expenses applied in the manner that the owners reported them. So we didn't apply our model to those. Those are examples of cap rates derived, actual cap rates in the market. So I correct my answer, I misunderstood the question.
Perhaps, given this confusion, the assessor might give an undertaking to provide their actual physical workups for those properties they show on page 18.
yeah. I don't think this is the forum for that.
And Mr. Chairman, as I said, these are samples of cap rates from the market, and they're not specific to support the cap rate chosen in this particular property.
Your comparables that you've used, is it safe to assume that you selected these because of the size and the,
Correct.
Approximate large
They're
size.
limited when you get into size ranges such as this. These were the most comparable in terms of size. In every case, these are older than the subject property, which would indicate that the subject property is somewhat superior to these comparisons, and thus the higher model rent.
right,
So they were the most comparable in terms of size.
right, was there a search done to see whether there were any more in the area of the subject property?
Yes.
I guess specifically St.
absolutely.
Boniface Industrial, if,
Yeah,
if there were.
absolutely. But there, as I say, there's very limited leases of that size. So essentially, what you see is what you get in terms of leases of that size.
Okay, and clarification on your fresh look, I think it was under non-recoverable expense sampling. Did I hear correctly that you said that leasing fees and marketing, things of that sort, were not considered to be a non-recoverable expense as well?
That's correct. Those are typically deducted after net operating income is determined, so they wouldn't be used to determine a market value of a property. We're not saying those aren't expenses, but they're not expenses used to determine the market value of the property. So that's the basis of the difference between Altus and us.
Okay, I thank you. Mr. Bergstrom, please.
A couple of things, and I know Mr. Fenner has seen this before. I have some follow with respect to their capitalization rates, and I don't know if you've seen it before. We should have one for each property and one for
it something the assessor would have seen before?
Yeah. So, that's not enough. So, yeah, I'm quite certain Mr. Penner has seen this before because I sat in a previous hearing with him on this.
Okay.
Is this, yeah, is this for all files?
Yeah, one for each file. Now, and actually you can get an extra copy if you want to, you know, take a look at it. There. You got an extra one there? I've got an extra one. You don't even need to share.
Thank you very much.
So, in this particular case, we are referring to the information in this with respect to the assessor's page 18. And I'm not sure if the panel members have seen this before. I'm not sure how much detail I should go into on them.
As much detail as you think is necessary to make your point.
To bring up a big door on the expense ratios. With respect to 90 Park Lane, you can see on page 1, and this is taken from their news release, which we also include as a part of our rebuttal evidence here, from their December 18th, 2017 news release. This was owned by Pirate, which is the Pure Industrial Real Estate Trust. It's a REIT. They were the vendor of this property at 90 Park Lane. And the gist of this is that the property, the tenant within this property was relocated prior to the sale. The property, or the asset as they call it, was unencumbered at the time of sale. That means it was unoccupied. There was no lease in place. On a vacant property, you cannot calculate a cap rate. Subsequent to the sale, I can also advise you that the property was occupied on a lease basis, but by an owner in an owner occupancy situation. So this is not really a cap rate. That's further verified when you look at page 5 of the brief, this rebuttal evidence, and you'll see there in their own news release, they say exactly that. Tenant was relocated, they actually expanded their space in a new location, and the property was sold vacant. The second part of this deals with 1100 Waverly Street. This is a property which is not pure industrial. I have in fact reviewed both the property sales verification form the department sent out and the tenant rent roll at the time of sale. I appreciate that the department may have it classified as industrial, but it's a very mixed-use property. It's a restaurant. It has a number of office spaces within there, including the MLCC. I personally verified a couple of weeks ago with somebody from MLLC, I think it's now known, that space, the 12,684 square feet is actually office. It was all office and warehouse. They have a laser tag facility in there. They have a gym facility in there. They have a restaurant and a bunch of office space. So while there may be some office space or some industrial space within there, there's also a large amount of other use that is not industrial within that property. More than that, and I certainly invited Mr. Penner to previously to review the income or the sales verification form for this property. And on that form, when they returned it, they actually went through the trouble of writing in office and industrial, not just industrial, office and industrial. That's consistent with our review of the rent roll, certainly at the time of sale. So it is, or should properly be excluded from consideration of a pure industrial cap rate, which leaves the assessor with the middle two at 7.44 and 8% in this case. Yeah. That's the information that we want to present with respect to the rebuttal of their cap rates.
Okay. Any comments or questions on?
Question, so not Nandy Park Lane, would a purchaser of that property have 2015 and 2016 income information?
The property had no lease in place, it had been vacated, and it was sold unencumbered. And if a property had a previous lease in place, it's not something that you would ever, certainly not something that I would ever calculate a capitalization rate from. If it's not, if it doesn't have an income or a lease in place as of the sale date, it's not a cap rate extraction you can calculate.
So my question again was, is there 2015 and 2016 income information available?
Not to me.
Not to you, but to a purchaser?
I don't know. It was, purchaser would also know that it was vacant at time of sale.
And based on the 15 and 16 information, would also know the income potential of the property?
But again, if you're using it in terms of a cap rate, you can't calculate that from a vacant lease. You don't know if it's gonna lease for less, you don't know if it's gonna lease for more, you don't know if it's gonna lease for the same amount. It was vacant.
So
at
it
the
was
time of-
occupied in 15 and 16? That's my question.
Pardon me?
The property was occupied and generating income in 15 and 16?
I don't know of a fact. All I can tell you is what Pirate says in their news release, and that the property was sold unencumbered at the time of sale.
So, Mr. Chairman, we did look at the 15 and 16 income information on this property and applied it to the sale price. That's how we did our cap rate. Moving on to 1100 Waverly Street. Are you aware that Colliers, when this sale took place, listed this as the largest industrial asset transaction of the year?
It's my understanding that Colliers based all of their reporting on this sale off of a news release.
So are you or are you not aware that Colliers noted this sale as the largest industrial asset transaction of the year?
And again, that's
That's the
my
question.
view, that this property is not a pure industrial transaction for all of the reasons that I've gone over.
Are you aware
But
of
his
Collier's
question was-
view?
I believe that that's what Collier reports, and I'm also of the understanding that they reported that off of a news release.
That's all my questions.
Any further, no? And I have nothing. So we'll hear from you then, please, Mr. Bergman.
Thank you. So our approach in most of the properties we're going to deal with today is that where there are leases in place, unless there's a logical and valid reason to disregard those leases, that's the lease, that's the rental information that should be applied. In this particular case, we've already, through questioning, brought forward that as of November 1st of 2018, the rental rate was going to be reduced to $7.50. I have on our page 8, well, let me back up a second. On page 5, very particularly, the very last sentence on page 5, and the very last sentence in paragraph 3, says that the value is to be estimated based on information which was known or which could reasonably have been known by diligent buyers and sellers in the period ending April 1st of 2018. And you recall in my questioning of the assessor that from the April 1st, 2018 rent roll, was very clearly disclosed that the rent moving forward was going to be $7.50 a square foot. Escalating after that, yes, but certainly going forward, that any increase like that would be covered off in the next reassessment. And in fact, without actually looking at it, I can tell you that it is my practice where a lease is coming up for renewal or I know as of the reference date, there's gonna be something higher in place, I typically will apply that unless there's a good reason not to. So, we took a look at page 8. We do show a number of rental comparables as well, and as Mr. Penner indicated, newer properties of this size are unusual. This particular property, with its size of 136,000, in excess of 136,000 square feet, is unusual. And I'll get into that more in a moment, but that, in our view, is something that poses an additional risk. Should a tenant ever vacate this property, there would be, in my view, significant difficulty in releasing that amount of space as a single unit. All of the rental comparables we show on page 8 are older. I can tell you that our comparable number 9 is actually the same space that the assessor shows as their comparable, the third comparable on their page 3. I can also tell you that I have personally requested from Palliser, who's the landlord, the owner and landlord of that property, to provide me with the lease information, or the, not just the lease information, but the tenant occupancies. So I can tell you that the $4.15 rent that we show there is in fact verified by the information that they provided. Just bear with me while I look through here really quickly. Ordinarily I bring it, but I didn't bring it here. But I can tell you that I did request it directly from Palliser, that I examined the information, and that $4.15 a square foot is the actual net rent in place for that particular space, based on the rent or the lease that was signed in July of 2013. We have applied a vacancy rate of 4%. This is consistent with how we have calculated the capitalization rates within our cap rate study for the newer sales. The older sales we use 3.5 based on the previous parameters. I can tell you that that is based on the Johnson report vacancy rates. I can also tell you that for St. Boniface, which Mr. Coach actually breaks down separately, the investment, whether you look at single or multi-tenant industrial vacancy in the St. Boniface area, is significantly higher than 4%. It's nowhere close to 2.5. So when you look at St. Boniface in particular, where the subject property is located, we can certainly quite comfortably suggest that a 4% vacancy allowance is something that any purchaser would likely apply in this case. Shortfall rate, there's no disagreement, $3.75 a square foot. And now we turn to the non-recovered expense allowance. And we have as a separate filing included our non-recoverable expense study. And again, I'm going to ask the board, I'm quite certain that you've seen it before, and so how much detail do you want me to go into for this?
You've seen this before? Just touch on the highlights if you would, please. I don't think we need to go.
Okay, and so I can tell you that the 7% total non-recoverable expense ratio that we say is appropriate for investment type properties does not include consideration of management. It does not include consideration of tenant improvements. There are in every property operating costs or expenses associated with the property that are not recoverable from a tenant. Even the city's own study, limited as it is, seems to indicate that as well. And so our calculations, and we go through quite a number of them that you've seen in this report before. We are not using this in the determination of a net effective rent. These are actual costs associated with a property non-recoverable from a tenant that should be applied in each and every instance. In some years it'll be lower, in some years it'll be higher, and in fact, when you look at the assessor's table, you'll see one of the expenses, one of the non-recoverable expenses that they show is actually a negative percentage. How can it possibly be that they have an income as a non-recoverable expense? And that's the only way that they can calculate a negative expense ratio. So mathematically, that makes no sense. What I am telling you is that there will be a range of any particular year. In this case, we've looked at, I believe it's a 3-year operating history for a large number of properties. I can tell you that there was a significant amount of work that went into preparing this study for presentation to this board, and so for all of those reasons, we continue to argue that 7% as a total non-recoverable expense ratio is the correct figure to use. Coming back to our brief, with respect to the cap rate, we have again filed a separate study, the Altus Group Limited Capitalization Rate Study for Industrial Properties for this assessment cycle. Excuse me. And again, I'm quite certain that the members have seen this before. So, again, how much detail would you like me to go in?
Just be site specific on this one, tell us why you selected that rate.
Okay. And so I can tell you that in looking at this, and I can speak to this because I did it, we looked at the cost of money in the market, what was going on in the financial markets. We looked at the market reports. We looked at the industrial supply, are we coming on board of industrial supply in particular areas. We have included within our information the actual excerpts from the cap rate reports for both Colliers and CBRE. More than that, we've also included the benchmarks, and we include that at page 31. Those are the benchmarks for Colliers, and you'll see there for industrial, single tenant, steel frame, precast concrete, tilt-up, between 50 and 100,000 square feet. You'll recall that the subject property is in excess of 136,000 square feet, so that exceeds their benchmark. That poses an additional risk in my view. And so their 6.5% to 7.25% range could certainly argue for a capitalization rate somewhat higher than they're suggesting that range ought to be. We have similarly included at page 35 CBRE's glossary of terms. And there you'll see that they combine suburban office and industrial. Here you'll see that they talk about for Class A industrial best of class product recently completed to a high standard, leases to better quality tenants, 5 to 10 years leases, typically newer construction. No disagreement on all of that, but their range again is between 6.5% and 7%. Based on all of that, including the size of the subject property, the fact that the lease is set to expire roughly 5 years after the reference date, becomes a riskier investment from that point of view. Based on all of that, we think that a 6.5 cap rate more accurately reflects the market view for this property. Based on all of that, we show our mathematical calculations on page 10. 4% vacancy rate, $750 per square foot, 7% non-recoverable, 6.5 cap, looking for reduction to $13,706,000. I think that's the information I wanted to cover here.
Thank you. Mr. Penner, questions for the applicant?
Mr. Chairman, I have some rebuttal based to deal with vacancy for one, I'd like to submit, and secondly, the 630 Kernahan lease, which is stated by Mr. Boardroom at 415. We actually have the hard copy of the submission from that property owner, which clearly indicates $8, so I'd like to submit those two items as rebuttal.
Speaking to the applicant first, please.
So vacancy, this one, sorry.
Okay, so this will be post-reference, second quarter Q18. So this ought to be excluded as post-reference.
What were you showing there?
Basically, it talks about vacancy in the quarter, which is,
But second quarter?
well, the report is for the first half, so it covers first and second quarter.
Post-reference information.
Let me see that, please.
I've highlighted the important information on page 2.
Yeah, no, I'm not gonna allow that.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, we're speaking of November 1st, a rent decrease on the property, which is clearly post-reference. If we're going to allow that type of information, then this is certainly pertinent information as well.
It's quite clear from the assessor's information itself that that was known and shown on the April 1st, 2018 rent roll. So it was known as of that date. We're talking about a very different fish on the Q2 2018. The assessor was certainly welcome to bring in the Q1 report, which exists.
We'll deal with that in your questioning of Mr. Borgstrom on the vacancy then.
Okay, fine.
And what was the other one?
I have no objection to this. But I also,
Thank you.
I understand that this, what this shows, and I regret not bringing the information with me, but I'm telling you, I requested it, I looked at it, it's 415 a square foot.
So what we have here, Mr. Chairman, it's the fourth one down, 108,842 square feet. The monthly rent being 73,951 with utility recovery there. It's indicated as a net lease. If you do the math on that, we have 108,842 square feet at $8.15 per square foot net. This is actual information submitted to us and verified with the agent.
Yeah, the only thing I point out with this information is that while they may have Xed off the property or the net lease column, you'll see there that there are no property tax recoveries, there are no annual general admin recoveries. It appears to show only recoveries for utilities and maintenance expenses. That's the only thing that I point out with this information. And I'll certainly check when I get back to the office, but I'm quite confident in all that information.
Do you have any questions regarding this?
I do not.
Okay, did you want to proceed with your questioning then?
No, actually, I have no questions.
You have no questions regarding the vacancy?
Well, I think we've spoken to the vacancy. We believe 2.5% is what the market.
No, that's fine.
Thank you.
I don't want to be leading, I just thought we'd talk about that. Questions?
No, thank you.
Yeah, no, my only question was regarding that discrepancy in the leases, and I think you gave your description of why you think it's the 415 is the actual number versus the 815 reported.
And to be fair to Mr. Panner, this is clearly what was submitted to the city, but I also know that I requested the information and received it from them directly, so I'm quite confident in the information we're providing.
Desire for summation?
We think this is an industrial grade property worthy of a 6 cap. We believe 2.5% vacancy is fair and reflects the market, also reflects the performance of the property. We believe 765 rent, as per the model, is fair. It's less than the actual rent in place at the record date. We ask that the panel confirm the value.
Thank you. Mr. Bergstrom?
I think the panel has been made aware of all of the points of disagreement on this property.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next property we'll deal with then is 385 Debates.
That didn't take nearly as long as I thought.
It's safe to assume that the line of presentation and questioning is going to be asked and answered and already presented, and we're gonna go on individual.
We hope so, Mr. Chairman,
Okay.
but we'll take it on.
That's
a
fine,
case-by-case
no,
basis.
you both have as much opportunity to present your case as necessary, but if it's something that we can streamline.
Yeah, and if I might, to that end, there was no disagreement with respect to rent on this particular property, so the issue will be limited.
The non-recoverables, the
Vacancy,
vacancy and cap rate.
non-recoverables, and cap rate, I believe.
May I proceed, Mr. Chairman?
Please.
Thank you. The roll number here is 0609-297-4500. The address is 385 Debate Street. The value in the roll for 2020 is $5,130,000. This is a building that was built in 2003, has a wall height of 24. The other pertinent details are listed there. Land area is 143,116. Comfortable land to building area ratio of 3.55. Turning to page 2, we see that the owner has complied with our request for income information. There was no subject property leases found on this property. We have on page 3 some rent comparisons to support our model rent. They range from $6.23 to $8 a square foot, and we believe these comparison rents support our model of $6.39 a square foot overall.
I'm sorry, what was the overall?
$6.39 per square foot. Turning to page 4, we'll see the breakdown there of the leasable area into 2 parts. The overall, as I said, was $6.39. So apply that to leasable area of 51,187. The potential rent is 327,162. Again, we apply a vacancy rate of 2.5%, which is the market vacancy for this area. To that, we apply 2% for non-recoverables, and to this, we apply a cap rate of 6%. The value derived is $5,130,000, applying a 6% cap rate. Page 5 is just the income value summary again. Again, in this property, we see it falls below the 20th percentile of our cap rate study. It's certainly not the lowest at 5.5, but it falls in that range, and again, it's within the range indicated by CBRE. Page 7 are the MAA excerpts. Page 8 is an overhead view of this property. A couple different looks from the overhead. And some street views of the property on page 9. Page 10, we have the income and expense information submitted to us. The tenant here is one and the same with the owner, that being Gateway Book Binding. And the property owner is Gateway Holdings, Inc. They're related, so we don't garner any useful information from the lease in place. Page 12, again, is our addenda, which talks about the 2020 reassessment, cap rates, and the non-recoverable expense sampling. So I don't need to go over that again. So once again, the value in the road for 2020 is $5,130,000. We believe it's fair and equitable, and ask the board to confirm the value.
Thank you. Mr. Boardroom?
Just one quick question, and not a criticism, but I'm going to assume that you've not had an opportunity to previously inspect this property.
I have not.
Thank you.
Do you have a record of when this property was inspected last?
I don't have that with me. So
Okay, and that's fine.
So this is model generated. The assumption is it's normal for its age.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Bergstrom?
So I want to start with sort of a pictorial tour of this property. We've been working for this client going back to the KPMG days when we were in the property tax practice there. So starting on page 12, we have included here some pictures from that inspection. In particular, as you look at page 5 or page 14, in the picture of the reception area, you'll see as we go through the pictures from the July 2018 inspection that that's exactly the same. Nothing has changed in there. When you look at the pictures on page 15, you'll see there, this is actually a building with a sloped roof. Once you account for the metal joists, you have less than 24-foot clear height. The other thing that you have in here is a significant portion of this property, particularly in the warehouse, having a low ceiling height or a low clear ceiling height arising from the presence of mezzanine space. And so when I looked at this property, I did my review on the basis of what would the property generate generally in terms of the market rent, applying as we normally do a lower rate for the mezzanine area, and so the rent came out pretty close to where it should be. Slightly high, but not enough to come in and quibble over. But this does, and as we go through this, there are a few features of this property that I want to point out that, in my view, constitute additional risk that should be adjusted for or recognized in the cap rate. So you'll see there at pages 19 and following, these are all pictures taken from the July 17th, 2018 inspection of the property. And you'll see on page 21 there, the reception area on the main floor, that's exactly the same as it was in 2004. You'll see there on page 22, you'll see the low clear ceiling height. You'll see the suspended fluorescent lighting in there. That's main floor space. And then you'll see their upper floor space on page 23 sits one above the other, and so you have less functional space on both levels. Clearly it works for them, but in terms of the open market, it's less functional, and then the balance of the pictures, it's a normal sort of industrial property. The things that I wanted to bring to your attention: this is a metal frame structure. This is not concrete tilt-up, which, according to the benchmarks, is what's expected today when you look at all of the new construction going on, particularly out in the Brookside area. Even for single occupant properties, you'll see the concrete tilt-up style. You'll see clear wall height, generally speaking, more than 22 feet. We also note that there is low ceiling height in roughly 20% of the office area, or the warehouse area. So fully 1/5 of the warehouse area has what we would consider to be low ceiling height, low clear ceiling, and that's the half-height space due to the mezzanine space and the space underneath it. The other issue that we suggest needs to be recognized here is that the subject property has only one grade level loading bay and two dock level loading bays. That's insufficient for a property that's roughly 50,000 square feet, leasable in size. 3 loading docks is inadequate, certainly in terms of modern standards. And so, based on all of that, we go through the calculations on page 9. Again, a 4% vacancy rate. This is St. Boniface. It is the new St. Boniface Industrial Park. Non-recoverables at 7%. In this case, because of all of those factors that I've just gone over, we've gone a 25 basis point bump from what we suggested on the last property. And so we think 6.75% is the right number on this property. And so we're looking for a reduction down to $4,214,000. I think that's all we wanted to cover here.
Thank you. Mr. Penner, questions?
Yeah, Mr. Boardroom, which cap rates in your cap rate study that you submitted would you be relying on for this particular property?
We don't rely on any one cap rate ever. We look at all of the things contained within the capitalization rate study, including what's going on in the financial markets in terms of mortgage rates, in terms of development in and around the city, in terms of their market reports, CBRE and Colliers, and in terms of capitalization rate extractions for that information that we could obtain. And so it's based on all of that. It's not one particular one.
Right, so I note on page 13 of your cap rate submission, you're still listing the slate portfolio as a cap rate in there.
Yep.
Are you aware that you've included 14 properties when in fact only 12 sold in that portfolio?
That is, of course, patently not true. And I do, in fact, have some rebuttal evidence to that effect once you're done your cross-examination.
And Mr. Chairman, I'll have rebuttal evidence on that. Slate portfolio, we need to address the errors in it. We still see this slate portfolio showing up in many agents' presentations, and there's a glaring error in it, and I would like to address it in the form of rebuttal.
Okay, and you're
But
going to have,
once he presents the
you're going to have
rebuttal,
a rebuttal as well?
we'll have Sir rebuttal, that's correct.
Have you concluded your other questioning? Perhaps we could do that and then deal with the,
No, I think I'm going to focus my questions on the cap rates.
okay.
I'm not sure how many copies you need,
Okay.
so take what you
This is
need.
for, it's, oh, this is for,
Okay.
And whenever you're ready, Mr. Chairman, I'll take you through my rebuttal.
Yeah, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on page 1 of my brief, the issue is that the agent for the owner has included a portfolio sale of multiple properties in his cap rate evidence, that being, thank you, that being the Slate portfolio. On November 24th, 2015, Slate Office REIT announced the sale of 12 Winnipeg industrial properties totaling 516,495 square feet for $47 million. The agent for the owner has listed 14 properties as part of this $47 million portfolio sale. All of Slate Office REIT's news releases and regulatory filings confirm that there were 12 properties sold, not 14, as the agent states. The news release issued by Slate on November 24th provides the details of the 12 properties in the portfolio sale, including the gross leasable area of each property. This information can be further verified in the audited annual financial statement filed by Slate Office REIT. So turning to page 3, this is the news release announcing the sale of 12 industrial properties for $47 million. You can see that highlighted on page 3 of my brief. The page from the audited annual financial statement is found on page 8 of my brief. So again, this is information listed in the audited financial statements of State Office REIT. Where highlighted there on page 8, it indicates that there was 12 properties that sold for $47 million. The agent for the owner does list these 12 properties that sold on page 24 of his submission, of his cap rate study. The leasable area of the 12 properties totals 516,495 square feet. However, the agent for the owner is suggesting there were 2 additional properties that sold as part of the $47 million portfolio sale. And I'm referring to page 24 now of the agent's submission on cap rates, which is labeled as index number 5. This is the Slate portfolio. So on this page 24, you can see at the bottom of the main table, 2019 Sargent and 1950 Sargent. And these 2 properties have 140,273 square feet. So we already know that the portfolio is for 516,000 square feet. If we add these 2 properties in, we have 676,000 square feet. That information does not jive with what was publicly released. The fact is, these 2 properties were never owned by Slate Office REIT. We have confirmation from an official of Slate Office REIT, the vendor, that they never owned these properties. Obviously, Slate Office REIT could not have sold these properties that they never owned. Furthermore, on page 9 of my brief, this is the status of title for 2019 Sargent. And what we can see on page 9 and page 10 is that the vendor of this property was Slate Management Corporation, which is a different corporation altogether from Slate Office REIT. And in fact, that they sold 2019 Sargent for $1 million. So this is clear evidence that this was not part of that portfolio sale. This property sold separately, as did 1950 Sargent. So if you'll turn to page 2 of my brief, I have a chart here which should make things clear for everybody.
I'm sorry, where are we going?
Page 2 of my rebuttal, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
So all of these properties listed here were owned by Huntington Capital Corp. Huntington decided to spin out the properties on the left, and they formed a REIT called FAM REIT. And those are the properties listed there, and those are the properties that, the 12 properties that were sold in the portfolio sale. So FAM REIT owned those properties, and Huntington maintained ownership of the 3 properties on the right, 2019 Sargent, 1950 Sargent, 2595 McGilvery. So Slate Capital Corporation came along in late 2014, and they bought Huntington Capital Corp. So when they bought Huntington Capital Corp, they took over FAM REIT and renamed it Slate Office REIT. And they were 30% owner and manager, just as Huntington Capital was. And in that takeover, they assumed 100% ownership of the 3 properties on the right, 2019 Sargent, 1950 Sargent, 2595 McGilvery. So Slate Management Corporation is the owner of those 3 on the right. Slate Office REIT owned those on the left. So Slate Office REIT did indeed sell these 12 properties on the left, 516,000 square feet, we've already heard that number, and that was what was sold for $47 million. These 3 properties on the right were sold separately and for additional compensation over and above $47 million by Slate Management. So those had nothing to do with the portfolio sale. So what the agent has done is taken the net incomes from these properties and suggested that it was part of the $47 million. So now we have the net incomes from 14 properties over the sale price of 12 properties. So this results in a cap rate that's not true. There was only 12 properties and 12 net incomes. So clearly, the information which we've been able to verify with the vendor, State Office REIT, in which they told us they never owned those properties, so it wasn't part of the sale. So turning back to page 1 of my brief, as I stated, the agent has used the NOIs from 14 properties and applied them against the sale price of 12 properties in his cap rate calculation. So the cap rate concluded is therefore skewed to the high side. 7.87% cap rate for a portfolio of investment-grade industrial properties is not realistic. Rob Preto, a Collier's associate in Winnipeg, notes in his quarterly 2016 cap rate summary the sale of Slate Office REIT's 12 properties, and he notes that the cap rates for industrial properties were typically between 6.5% and 7%. If we exclude the NOIs from those 2 properties at the bottom, 2019 Sargent, 1950 Sargent, then the net operating income from those 12 properties is $3,152,423. Dividing that by 47 million gives us a cap rate of 6.7, which falls exactly in the range indicated by Mr. Preto. So the correct cap rate, if we were to use this portfolio sale, is 6.7, using the actual facts in the case, which is 12 properties, not 14. The frustrating part of this is agents have continued to put this out as though it's a valid cap rate from the sale, but the information is incorrect. We have finally been able to verify that fact with State Office REIT. And basically, they're just verifying what was publicly released, that being 12 properties sold for $47 million. So we have verification, and it's frustrating to see this continue to be put forth as a valid cap rate when the details of it are wrong. Nobody's been able to provide a breakdown of the sale price between the properties because they couldn't do it. Obviously, 2019 Sargent, we know, sold for $1 million. So you can't allocate anything to those 2 properties that sold separately. So I just wanted to point out once again, and I know the boards are probably getting tired of hearing this, but the information is incorrect, and we verified the information. So taking the 7.87 out of Altus's cap rate submission, there's not a cap rate in their evidence over 7%, and it essentially supports our position on cap rates.
Mr. Boardroom, did you want to comment or question anything?
Just a couple of
that's
questions, and I
presented?
do have some rebuttal as I indicated. You indicated that Slate Office REIT has now told you. Do you have a copy of the correspondence with you?
No.
Ask this more broadly. Was it in the form, written form?
Yes.
Was it by email or letter?
Doesn't matter.
Was it by email or letter?
Yes.
Which one?
Email.
Okay, and do you have a copy of that with you?
No.
Okay. Who from the department made the inquiry?
It's not relevant.
Who from the department made the inquiry?
I don't know.
Have you looked at the email?
Yes.
Then you know who sent it from the department. Who
What
sent
we
it?
have, Mr.
Okay,
Boardroom.
so
It's a relevant
I
question.
think it's suffice to say that it was an assessor from your section that did this, or?
And I appreciate that, but we don't have the email in front of us, and we've got
Right.
some cerebral on this, but we don't know who that is, and we may wish to subpoena them for a future hearing. So
Mr.
I'm just
Chairman,
looking for the identity.
for privacy I don't think it's necessary to disclose that information. The important part is that we confirmed the facts that we've been portraying from the beginning and that they've publicly released. They're just confirming what we already know. There's no great revelation, just that there was 12 properties, $47 million, which they disclosed in their audited financial statements.
I appreciate the argument, but let's come back to the questions. And so you are refusing to disclose who from the department sent the email?
Yes, that's correct.
Who from the Slate office replied?
Again, it's not my place to disclose the name.
Okay. So we do have some surrebuttal
Okay.
with respect to this issue. I can tell you that Mr. Penner continues to bring forward erroneous information with respect to this sale, based on a number of things. I know that Mr. Penner has seen this before, so I can show you on page 2 that Narland is in fact the owner of both properties on Sargent that Mr. Penner is referring to. I can also advise you that these properties sit on leased land, which may well be why Slate Office REIT reported them in the manner they did. They don't own whole of the property. These are assets which are buildings sitting on a long-term lease from the Winnipeg Airports Authority, who in turn leased the land from Her Majesty the Queen and the Lady of Canada. I can tell you that Mr. Slaughter from our office personally contacted a VP from Narland. I can tell you, because I've seen the email, that vice president confirmed that Narland in fact acquired all of the properties that we have included, and we include them again on page 5 at the back. They have confirmed that they acquired all of these properties as we described. We have in fact adjusted this cap rate from what was initially presented to this board, and that's to reflect the fact that the bottom 2 buildings are on leased land, so that notwithstanding Mr. Penner's obfuscations, these are, all these properties sold. They sold from, and if you look at, even at Mr. Penner's table on page 2, Slate Capital Corporation, if you look at his information, owned everything. Everything is now owned by Narland. Valid sale of a portfolio verified by direct inquiry with Narland. And I'm happy to have Mr. Penner present the email of the department's inquiry to this board in rebuttal. But he is refusing to even identify who from the department or who from Slate answered that. So we have no way to verify or test the veracity of his information that he's presenting here. So I can tell you, based on all of this, that this is in fact a valid sale and that we do continue to rely on it. In fact, adjusting the cap rate as indicated from 8.3 down to 7.87%. But Narland, the vice president from Narland, has in fact verified this as a valid portfolio transaction.
Thank you. Mr. Penner?
So how was the overall purchase price determined?
I don't have the details of that.
How was the cap rate determined?
The cap rate was determined by taking that the net operating incomes by the sale price.
So when Narland purchased these properties, did they look at each one individually and value them individually?
I don't know.
Okay, so in your experience, would a property built in 1977 or 1965 have the same cap rate as 1999?
Well, again, these aren't individual sales. This is a sale of a portfolio. And so it's not going to be possible to break them out by individual property
Why not?
because it's a portfolio sale.
So how would a purchaser determine the value then? Without looking at the individual properties?
They will have done their due diligence. That's the agreed to price. Those are the incomes. that's just a mathematical calculation to arrive at the cap rate.
So now you suggested that Slate Office REIT perhaps didn't disclose the last two because they were on leased land.
I'm suggesting that that's a possible reason. I don't know why it doesn't show up in their report. We don't work for, I don't believe we're working for Slate. All I can tell you is that we confirmed the sale with the purchaser.
Right, and I'm not disputing that Narland purchased all of them, but the question is, who did they purchase them from?
Let me just further expand on that, that it was the purchase of the entire portfolio simultaneously,
Including 2019 Sergeant,
including both of those properties.
which sold for $1 million.
However, it was registered.
So that one registered for $1 million.
The property on Sargent?
2019 Sergeant. So it's in
So-
my,
so it appears.
it's in my evidence.
Yeah,
They-
so
they-
it appears.
They purchased it for $1 million
All I can
from
tell,
Slate Management.
well, all I can tell you is that the entire portfolio transacted at the same time, as reported to us, arising from our inquiry to Narland. We received the response to the inquiry from the vice president, who was seized of knowledge of the transaction. And so it is a valid portfolio sale. that
Have
we
you
will
spoken
continue
to
use.
anybody from Slate Office REIT?
I have not.
Okay. So 1935 Sergeant Avenue, that's on a land lease, is it not?
I believe that's correct.
And they disclosed it as part of they disclosed that as part of the sale.
I can only tell you that all of the properties sold and transacted simultaneously to Narland.
So they disclosed some. Would a publicly traded REIT not have to do more disclosure, not less, if there were circumstances of risk, like
Frankly,
on
if
these
you're
land?
taking issue with their regulatory disclosures, that this is not the appropriate venue for that. We've made inquiry regarding this portfolio, and we stand by it as a valid transaction for the portfolio.
Okay, so looking at 2019 Sergeant, we know that it sold for $1 million, and they have a net operating income that you've listed at $500,000. That would be a 50% cap rate, would it not?
As is not unusual with portfolio sales, there may be an allocation among the different properties at different levels. All I can tell you is that the total sale price, we know from the reporting from Narland.
Right.
And so that's how we arrive at total portfolio price.
So we know that was $47 million,
We're not
correct?
extracting out individual cap rates from this.
But the total sale price was $47 million?
I believe that that's correct.
For 12 properties.
No, actually for all of the properties that appear here.
So the news release issued by Slate Office REIT is not correct.
So I don't have any knowledge and can't comment on the Slate News release. All I can tell you is that we have verified the sale with the purchaser.
But this is a fact. This is a fact in this case. 12 properties for $47 million. Plus, it's gone by the auditor. If there was additional properties that Slate Office REIT chose not to disclose, do you not think the auditor would have issue with it, or the shareholders?
Well, again, I can't comment on what Slate did or did not do. I am telling you that our confirmation of the portfolio was with Narland, the purchaser. So with respect to Slate, I can't answer any questions about that. What I can tell you is that we verified this with Narland, the purchaser.
So you have no reason to doubt Slate Office
I
REIT's
have no
news
reason
release,
to doubt Narland. I have no information on Slate.
other than this public news release and audited
Well,
financials.
that's within your evidence, it's not within ours.
But these are public documents.
And so, again, Mr. Chairman, we've confirmed it with the purchaser.
I think we've heard enough.
And Mr. Chairman, also confirm with this title that Slate Management Corporation and not Slate Office REIT was the vendor of that property. I think that's all the facts that we need to discuss on it, so we can move on.
Okay. And would that conclude your questioning as well then?
Yes, I was focused on cap rate here, and I'll leave it there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Ms. Anderson, if you have questions, would you like
No question.
on, I guess on the sir rebuttal or rebuttal, but I think
appreciate
we've
that.
done that ad nauseum.
I have taken a lot of notes, and I think I am as good as I'm gonna get on this one.
So nothing on his actual
Thank you.
brief presentation then?
No, I'm good.
And I think it's asked and answered questions, your vacancy, your non-recoverables, and your cap rate. I think you said that you put a 0.25% premium on it.
Based on all of the things, metal frame, poor loaded facilities, you have 20% of the warehouse with what is effectively 12-foot clear wall height, clear ceiling height, sorry, because of the large size of the mezzanine area, and we show those in the pictures, arising from all of that.
Thank you. Desire for summation, or have we?
I think that I'll let the presentation stand.
Mr. Boardroom, same.
I'm good.
Thank
Still
you.
good, thank you.
Are we good to push on, or do we need a short break?
I'm at your disposal.
Pardon?
I'm at your disposal.
You're okay to continue on? Okay. And I'll bring us to the next property, which I think we're gonna skip down to 70 Duran.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the roll number here is 06 05 309 1200 70 Duran. The value in the roll is $6,189,000. This is a warehouse built in 1981. The wall heights are indicated at 20 feet. The land area at 156,000 square feet. The rest of the pertinent details are there. Turning to page 2, the owner has complied with our request for information. There are subject leases in place on this property, and they're listed there on page 2, ranging from a low of $4 to a high of $6.95. On page 3, we have some comparison rents shown that support our model rent. They range from $6.50 a square foot to $8 a square foot. Turning to page 4, the total leasable area of this property is 72,186. The model has used an overall rent of $6.38, as shown on the various premises there. So that gives us a potential rent of $460,486. Again, this is the same area as the other properties, and we believe 2.5% is the vacancy indicated by the market. And that's what we've applied to get the EGI. To that, again, we're applying the 2% non-recoverable expenses there and a shortfall rate to derive a net operating income of $433,228. The cap rate chosen for this property is 7%. Applying that to the NOI gives us a capitalized value of $6,189,000. So our model rent is slightly higher than the actual rents in place, but we believe they are certainly close enough. And we note that one of the premises, the actual rent in place is $4. That's a space occupied by the owner, Quadreal, and that's clearly below market. A more appropriate market rent for that space is $6.52. So that's a big part of the difference in potential rent from the actuals. Typically, this property owners recovered 99% of their costs. back in 2015, their rent was $386,000, their NOI was $382,000, so there was only 1% not recovered. So $433,000, we think, is a pretty accurate net operating income here. Turning the page, we have the cap rate table on page 6, MEA excerpts on page 7, some overhead views of this property on page 8, different views on page 9, and some street views as well. Financials are listed on page 11 and 12. Page 13 is a synopsis of the tenants in place at April 2018. We can see there that the building is full. Page 14, we have the rent roll there. Noting the total rents come up to $435,098. That's taking the total base rent of $36,258. The number at the bottom, 36,258 times 12 gives us 435,098 divided by 72,816 square feet gives an actual rent on this property of $598. As I said, we're a little bit higher than that at $638, but part of the reason is the one rent at $4 on Quadriel's group there. The second to last, just above Shaw Telecom, Quadriel, rent at $4, that's below market, and that accounts for the difference between our model and our annual and the actual rents in place. Again, page 15 to 19 to 20, the excerpts from our addenda information, again talking about cap rates, model parables there. So based on that, we think the net operating income that we have would pretty much flow down as it did in 2015 to the bottom line, and we think it's fair. 7% cap for a building of this size and age, we think is also fair and well supported, and we would ask that the panel confirm the value at $6,189,000.
Thank you. Workstrom, questions?
I do. You, in your presentation of your evidence, referred to the owners recovering 99% of the operating costs, correct?
That's what we saw in 2015,
In
correct?
2015, so not 2016, not 2017.
We weren't provided with
And
financial
so
statements for those years.
Where in your evidence, and I looked, I didn't quite see it, can you direct me to 2015 information that you're talking about here?
I can submit it as rebuttal if you wish.
This is your evidence, you're not telling me about your evidence, are you?
No, I'm rebutting yours.
So it's fair to say that you've not
I have the documents should you
Fair to
want to
say
see
that
them.
you've not included it here in your evidence, correct?
Not in my evidence, but I can make them available if you wish.
I think you're under oath, you're making a
Fair
statement
enough.
based on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So in this particular case, the model has generated a 7% cap rate. The building was built in 1981,
Yes,
so that makes it 37 years as of the reference date, correct?
correct.
Yes? Okay. Do you know what the typical life expectancy of industrial properties is?
Not offhand, no.
Those are my questions.
Thank you. Sanderson?
Question?
No questions?
No.
So the cap rate that's been applied, the 7%, is that primarily because of the age?
Well, the fact is our age, size, and location, and our market analysis shows building of that size and age in that location would garner a 7% cap rate.
Thank you. Mr. Boardroom?
Thank you. Coming to the essential particulars, starting at page 8, I agree with Mr. Penner. One of the units is in fact leased to what I would consider to be non-arm's length circumstance. And so you see there under net market rent per square foot, we have in fact adjusted that up to $6. And as you look at the rents in place, in particular the net contract rents in place, it certainly falls, $6 certainly falls in the range of rents this property is experiencing or can experience. And as we go through the balance of the day and the other rental properties in this area, that's consistent with the area. So we have adjusted that to $6 a square foot. Similarly with Unit 74, that lease is coming due just a few months after the reference date. And so there is some risk involved with that. We have, for that reason, adjusted that rent slightly downwards, down to $6, which is the same rate we apply to the quadrille occupied space. Overall, you see there the mathematical calculations, the gross potential rent we calculate, $435, $143, or $598 a square foot. It's about a 40-cent per square foot difference. We think that's appropriate. 4% vacancy, certainly based on the information we looked at, and I didn't go over it in great detail before, but I just want to touch on it very quickly. We actually include not all of the information that we looked at in terms of vacancy, but we certainly include industrial vacancy within our cap rate study at page 8 and following, and I'm certainly going to invite the panel to take a look at that. You'll see there in terms of investment properties for Winnipeg in general, significantly higher than the 2.5% that the city is suggesting. That's all within our cap rate study. And so our 4% actually is quite moderate in this case. In this case, based on all of the information we've presented, we think 7.25 is the cap rate to use. If you look at for example, a Marshall Valuation Service. Typically, industrial type properties have a 50-year life expectancy, can be extended beyond that with regular maintenance and upgrades. But however you want to slice it, this property is going to be roughly, I'm not throwing it at it's going to be roughly halfway through its life expectancy, at which point things start to happen with rent and occupancy. So we think 7.25 is a moderate adjustment to the capitalization rate. We go through the mathematics on page 9, and we're looking for a reduction of $5,208,000.
Your presentation?
Thank you, yes.
Thank you. Mr. Penner, questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. On page 8 of your brief, you noted you increased one rent from $4 to $6.
Yep.
And you changed one down from $6.95 to $6. That being unit number 74.
Yes.
So that unit is 12,976 square feet. The one right below it, unit 80, is also 12,966 square feet.
Yeah.
Did you give any consideration to putting that one at $6 as well?
No, that's the rent that the owner, and we went through this initially, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you agreed. The rents in place are what the owner is entitled to receive legally. They're also the rents that the tenant is obligated to pay under the terms of the lease. The one adjustment was made on the quadrille space because I don't consider that to be an arm's length relationship, and so we've adjusted that. The other one we've adjusted is the one, as you indicated, on 12,976 square feet. That's because that lease expires just a few months after the reference date, and so there's some risk there. There's some risk that the unit might go 100% vacant, so you're gonna have significant bump in vacancy. You might also have a lease renewal. Looking at the other rents in place in this property, it looks to me like that's likely what it would be released up at. So that's why I've adjusted that one only.
So
Or made those two
the
adjustments.
actual rent in place at April the 1st on unit 74 is $6.95?
Yes.
Thank you. That's all my questions,
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Anderson?
No questions.
Your logic for the 7.25% again, please?
Age related.
Thank you. Okay, next we'll deal with 115 debates. And you're ready, Mr. Assessor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The roll number here is 06-05-309-0500. The address 115 Debate Street. Again, a property in St. Boniface. The value in the roll for 2020 is $3,202,000. This property was built between 1979 and 1988 with an effective year built of 1982. Wall heights vary from 16 to 21 feet. The rest of the pertinent details are there on page 1. On page 2, the owner here complied with our requests for information. There are subject property leases in place ranging from 650 to 703 for the areas listed there. On page 3, we have some comparison leases to support our rent. They range from $6.15 to $8 a square foot, and the areas of these spaces are between 2,098 and 12,150 square feet. Turning to page 4, we have the premises listed there. The total area is 33,324 square feet. The model rent is an overall rent of $6.63 a square foot. So that gives us a potential rent of $221,098. Again, we're using 2.5% vacancy, which is indicated by the market in this area. To that, we're applying 2% for shortfall to determine the net operating income of $208,136. To that, we're applying a cap rate of 6.5% to determine the value of $3,202,000. Page 6 is just the income value summary again, just one income stream here. On page 6 is the cap rate table, and it falls within the 20th to the 80th percentile. Page 7, MAA excerpts. Page 8 are some photographs of the subject property. The overhead view. At the bottom, it shows it fairly well. There's two buildings here. A strip building in the front with multiple units, and a single occupied unit or building at the back. Page 9 has some different views of the property. Page 10 has some street views of this property as well. Pages 11 and 12, financial information, the rent roll is showing on page 13. On page 14 is a summary of the strip, the industrial strip mall there, 115 to 133 debates, showing 2 units vacant at April 2018. And page 15 shows the details of the other building. It's fully occupied, 12,524 square feet. Again, the addenda to our submission is found at the back of our brief. And that's my presentation. We believe $3,202,000 is fair and equitable, and we ask the board confirm that value.
Thank you. Mr. Boardroom?
Thank you. Start off at your page 2. Now if we take a look at your page 1, you show a total leasable area of 33,324 square feet.
Correct.
And if you look at your page 2, you show a number of leases for the subject property. And let me help you out here, that adds up to 25,004 square feet.
Yeah,
You agree with that?
I'll take your word for it.
Thank you. What happened to the rest of the space?
No lease is in place on those 2 spaces.
Vacant.
Yes.
Okay. So if we take a look at rent roll that you've included here, on your page 13, this property looks to me like it's got north of 6,000 square feet of vacant area, yes?
That's correct.
Of a total of 33,000, give or take, square feet of rentable area.
Yes.
Did you give any consideration to adjusting the vacancy rate on this property?
No.
Did you have an opportunity to look at what was going on in vacancy or with vacancy in this property historically?
Yes.
And do you know what it was previously?
Yes.
So do you know what it was for 2016?
Yes, there was no vacancy.
No vacancy in 16? You know what it was in 2015?
No vacancy.
You know what it was in 2015?
I do know. 15?
Yeah.
Yeah, 16 and 15. 15, I believe, was in around 6%.
And if we look a little further back at 14, do you know what that was?
No.
Okay. And the model-driven 7% cap rate, do we know what that's based on?
It's based on the size of this property, it's based on the age of the property and the location of the property.
Okay, sure. Do we know if ceiling height or clear wall height has any bearing on that?
I'm sure that's taken into account in your model.
But you're not sure.
No, I'm not positive.
Those are my questions, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Anderson?
No questions?
Clarification, the cap rate on this is 6.5%? I thought you mentioned 7.
6.5, yes, correct.
70, I'm looking at your page 4 and it shows 7.
Shows 6.5 on mine.
115 to me?
My apologies, I'm looking at the wrong one. There we go.
I've done that.
Thank you.
Based on that, were there any follow-up questions?
No, thank you. Yeah. I'll just see if you're confused.
And I think you answered the questions about vacancy. You didn't believe that an adjustment
No,
was
that-
necessary
that-
based on,
There is some vacancy in 17, but 16 and 15, no vacancy, so we weren't concerned.
And you would only consider over a market vacancy if it was something that was recurring?
Correct. We don't have any evidence of a vacancy issue with this property.
And the 6.5% cap rate you said was based on area, age,
Yeah, all
And
those
size.
factors, yes.
and so this one versus the last one is primarily the size. They're fairly same location.
Well,
Similar
it's-
age, or is
It's very
that-
close in location. This one has an effective age of 82. The last one was 81, I believe. So size enters into the equation as well as age.
And the 1988, that was the building at the back that was built afterwards? Is that, because there's two buildings, correct?
Yes, I'm not sure the order, but I believe you're correct. Building at the back.
One of the two, and it
Yeah,
looks like it probably is 32 according to this. Right. I thank you. Mr. Borgstrom, we'll hear from you on 115 the dates, please.
Thank you. So in this particular case, we can start at page 7, please. This particular property had a vacancy rate of about 30% as of April 1st of 2018. So in looking at the rental rates within the property, we show the table at the top there. I've actually applied $6.50 a square foot based again on the rents in place within the property, and which works out to an average of $671. The department's model comes in at $663. I will, as we go through our calculations, use the $671 because that's what I think it should be. Having said that, we also, under vacancy, show a history of the property, and you look back to 14. These are snapshots in time as of April of each year. So 2014, we had 20%, 2015, we had 6%. I agree with the assessor that it was 0 in 16 and 17 as of April, but as of April of 1st of 18, we had a 30% vacancy rate. I think that that needs to be acknowledged and recognized. Any potential purchaser would take a look at a 30% vacancy rate and not apply 2% or even 4% to the property. It's going to take them some time to cure that. It may result in lower rents, it may result in more money put into the property. I've made this adjustment very nominally at 6% vacancy rate. That's actually lower than the St. Boniface multi-tenant vacancy rate as reported by Johnson, so it's a moderate or modest adjustment, up to 6%. 375 shortfall, 7% non-recovered expenses. In this case, because of the property, I don't think that 6.5% is the right number. I think it's 7. That arises partly from it being 1979, but also partly being 1988. So you could make an argument that it should be 7.25. In this case, I've gone 7. We go through the mathematics on page 9, and we're looking for a reduction to $2,686,000 based on all of that.
Thank you. Mr. Penna, questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. On page 7 of your brief, Mr. Borgstrom,
Yep.
you note that the subject property is leased and has the following rents in place as of April 1st, 2018. Was there no rent in place for Unit 129, Steam Dry Canada?
That's a good question. Should have been. Let's have a look. Actually, when you look at page 16, occupancy date January 1st, 2018 on a 5-year lease, but it doesn't show any rent on there, so I've inserted $6 a square foot. Could have been $6.50.
Right, because this was for 2017, right? That's why it's not there, is that correct?
The rent roll we show on page 16, when you look at the top, is as of April 1st of 2018.
Right, but this information is, this is our request for 2017 info.
But they printed off for us
Yes.
the rent roll as of April 1st of 2018.
Right, so are you aware that they signed a lease for $9.25 a square foot?
Well, again, there's no information on here, so
So you're not aware of that?
I was not aware, no.
Okay, and just touching on the vacancy for a second, can you explain how you determined a 30% vacancy?
If you take a look at this building standalone, excluding the standalone building, so the multi-tenanted building actually works out to 30%.
And the other one being fully occupied? Means
Zero.
the overall vacancy rate would then be 18%, is that correct?
And I'll take your math at face value.
Thank you, that's all my questions.
Thank you. Ms. Anderson?
No, I have no questions.
I have no questions, thank you. We are going to take a short break. Mr. Penner, did you want to make a summation for the 4 properties you dealt with? Is that necessary?
I don't believe it's necessary,
Okay,
so.
and Mr. Borgstrom, here. Thank you. So we will take a short break. I say 5 minutes, but it'll probably be 10. Okay, I'll call the hearing back to order. So the next property we'll deal with is 141 Debates, and that's you, Mr. Harling, that will be from here on?
That's correct, yes.
So when you're ready, give us your evidence, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, the roll number for the property is 0605 309 0900. The address is 141 Debate Street. The 2020 assessed value is $3,071,000, purchase date April 1st, 2018. The property has 2 buildings on it. It is a 1-story building. The effective overall year built is 1979. Wall heights range from 18 to 20 feet. Property is zoned M2 for manufacturing. The land area is 85,164 square feet. Plan area is 34,860 square feet. We have a leasable area of 35,020 square feet and a land plan area of 2.44. Before I go further into my brief, I actually have a recommendation, because when I initially created the brief and received Mr. Borgstrom's brief, I did some more research on this property, and I discovered that the leasable area that the department has is slightly different than what Mr. Borgstrom was showing. So I had looked at the, if you look at page, actually, 14 of my brief, I have from the income expense and information from the property owner with the leasable area. Now, unfortunately, this is the 2016 mailer information we have, so I looked at the next year, 2017, and then discovered that this vacant premise actually is now being occupied by the tenant, this tenant PNP Games. So they're using the whole space now, and they are actually, the area has actually, at least the whole leasable area has actually been reduced. Before we had, we're at 35,020 square feet, but now it's actually 33,225 square feet. So that being noted, I wanted to make that correction in my brief and use that leasable area as mine going forward as the actual area. So
Do you have a revised workup?
I do actually have those, yes. Yeah. That's the only thing I was changing was just the, yeah, so I pass this out fast, you can just kind of see.
Thank you.
I think I actually gave mine there.
Thank you.
Probably extra.
Yeah, I think I actually gave mine, so. Thank you very much. So that being said, so based on the corrected leasable area, I'm recommending a value of 2,914,000 square feet. Would that be a record you'd be willing to accept, Mr. Borgstrom?
Clearly, I've not had the opportunity to discuss this with my client. Going forward, it would be more useful to have it in advance. So at this point in time, I think that we should probably just proceed. I do note that there's a difference in our cap rate and vacancy rate, so
Okay. I can definitely continue with the brief then, thank you.
I appreciate the corrections that went to the area. That makes it easier.
Thank you very much. Okay, going to page 2 of my brief, you'll see there's we have received the information, the request for information from the property owner has been received. There are no recent sales history information, no recent sales on the property. I do have the one subject lease in place on my brief here for the 149. Going to page 3 of my brief, it's a list of my rent comparables. They range from rents of $6.25 a square foot to $7.50 a square foot. The areas range from 3,000 square feet to 5,880 square feet. The wall heights range from 16 feet to 22 feet, and the ages range from 1979 to 1988. Page 4 of my brief is the income valuation of the property. Again, the leasable area I'm using now overall will be adjusted from the 3520 to the 32,225. We are using an overall model rent of $6.52 a square foot. Applying that, we get in potential rent of $216,740. We are using the 2.5% vacancy, which I believe we discussed previously in our, which is going forward. We are applying a shortfall of $375, 2% for non-recoverables, which gives us a net operating income of $203,980. We are using a 7% capitalization rate for this property, and this gives us an overall market value of $2,914,000. Going to page 5 of my brief. Again, this is just showing the capitalization rates that the city has, where our cap rates fall within in the 20th to 80th percentile, as well as other market reports from Colliers, Seabury, Cushman & Wakefield. I believe the 7% that we had used, again, based on each size and location, well, falls within the 20th to 80th percentile of the city, as well as with Colliers, CRDC, and Cushman & Wakefield, so I feel that the 7% cap is fair. Go to page 6 of my brief, is just the Municipal Assessment Acts excerpts. Page 7 of my brief, through 9. Page 10 is just some photos of the subject property, just some aerial views to show some different angles of the property, as well as the parcel boundary of the property. Page 11 through 20 of my brief just shows the income expense and information. And page 21 is just, again, fresh look the department's taken at the 2020 assessments. Page 22 is just samples of the cap rates of actual sales in the market, which were discussed previously. 23, again, is just some information of the non-recoverable expense samplings. Page 24 is the IWO standards. And that concludes my brief, and I feel the value I recommended at $2,914,000 is fair, very equitable, and should be confirmed. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Borgstrom, questions?
Just a couple. So the subject property is one great big building, right?
That is.
Built in two different sections.
That is correct, yes.
There. And so the wall height is in one section 18 foot and in the other section 20 foot, yes?
That is, yes, correct.
And so the clear ceiling height inside of that would be something less than that? foot and a half. You
Yeah.
get rid of the steel web and it's foot and a half, 2 feet lower.
Within the range, yeah, exactly, yeah.
And so clear ceiling inside the property is 16, 17, 18 foot lower than market expectations for industrial properties.
Generally, yeah, the average would be around 20, I guess, yeah, would be for industrial, yeah.
Higher than.
Well,
that.
higher, sorry, it would be at 20, yeah, 24, 20, yeah, higher, yeah, higher ceiling height, yes.
Is that something that would pose an additional risk to an investor of this type of property?
This is, again, this is a flex warehouse. I feel like, I don't believe it would have a significant impact, but I guess it could have a slight impact, yes.
Thank you, those are my questions.
Thank you. Ms. Anderson?
I have no questions, thank you.
Just page 4, I realized that you've got a revised workup.
Yes,
So your area is 33,225.
that's correct.
It was 35,020.
Yes.
Where was the discrepancy?
Actually, because in my brief, look on page 14, you'll see the actual, the leases in place. And again, the unit that is vacant, where it shows 7,560 square feet, that unit actually, like this P&P Games tenant that's in the one below, they actually occupy both those spaces now, but now it's one unit at 16,005 square feet. So this overall lease play has been reduced, like in the building itself.
Okay, so I noticed that it's still 652, 653 overall
Yes.
that you've applied. And yet, there's different rates per square foot on each unit.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes, I understand what you're saying. Yes, yes, yes.
So, does it come from, you just went with the overall?
Yes, I was going with the overall. I believe, looking from myself, Mr. Borgstrom's, we were within 5 cents of the actual overall rent per square foot. We were.
Okay, and the two premises that are both 3380 square feet,
Yes,
one has a model, these are all model rents?
these are model rents. Yes.
So one has a model rent of 745 and one has a model rent of 669?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
What is the difference in those units?
This one here.
Would it be the two different buildings that they're located in, or two different parts of the building?
Yeah, I believe because those ones are 3380. They are, yeah, they're not side by side, so they are in slightly different locations. However, they are the same size though. Yes, I see what you're saying though. Yes. I don't have the. Yeah, I can't. I don't need that.
If I might, if we look at it, your page 14, they're actually abutting each other in the middle of the building.
Oh yes. Okay. Yes, that's correct. Yes. Okay. So I guess that would have a bearing on the overall, being the location of the unit. So.
Okay, and once again, the 7% cap rate based on age,
Age, yes.
area,
Each
and
size location, yeah, would factor
and
size.
size. Thank you. Mr. Borgstrom?
Thank you. So, just quickly, the assessor's revised workup, we're within $1,500 on the income. And so the differences lie in the vacancy rate, the non-recovered expense rate, and arising from age and low wall height, clear ceiling if you wish. We think that 725 is the right number. Based on all that on page 8, we think it should be $2,548,000. Short and sweet.
Thank you. Mr. Harlan, questions for the applicant?
I do not believe I have any questions. Thank you.
Ms. Anderson?
No question, thank you.
I take it that the questions asked and answered.
That was my assumption.
Thank you. Let's move on then to 11 Duran. Whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The roll number is 06053140000. The address is 11 Duran Road. The 2020 assessed value is $2,063,000 at a working state of April 1st, 2018. There are two buildings on this property. There's a one-story building. The effective year built is 1982. The wall heights are 20 feet. The zoning is M2 manufacturing. The land area is 56,970. The plan area is 20,625, with a leasable area of 22,619, and a land of plan area of 2.76. Again, before I continue my brief, I actually again had done some more research on this property, and actually do have another recommendation on this property as well. If you'd like to,
Yep.
and so. The adjustment I had made was on the capitalization rate. We had modeled cap rate, it's cap rate at 6.5%. And after reviewing this property, I felt a 7% cap would be more reflective of this property based on its age, size, and location. So with that revised amounts, same rental rate I've used that were in my brief, the market value is estimated market value is at $1,916,000. Again, Mr. Borsham, I'm asking if you'd be inclined to take that, recommend that value.
Mr. Borsham?
Yeah, sorry, just taking a moment to cogitate the possibilities. So for this particular property, I'm wondering if we might phrase this as we're not going to oppose the recommendation, and it may be subject to further appeal subsequent to our reporting to our client, but I'm not going to oppose the recommendation at this point, and I won't present any evidence on our side, if that works for you.
Okay.
I don't have, obviously I don't have client authority to
Right.
accept rates, so.
Right. Questions or concerns?
I do have a question on protocol. Is it, can you not oppose? Are you supposed to just accept or reject?
I think what Mr. Borgstrom said was he's not going to present anything further. So we will make our decision based on the evidence that gets presented here.
Fair.
And has been filed, but we're not going to go through all our evidence.
Fair enough, thank you.
Right. Okay, so you have nothing further to present then? We'll just take this as filed. Thank you. And
No,
you
that's.
won't have any questions
No, I
regarding
haven't.
that, and
Good for me, so.
you have no questions or concerns
No, I
regarding
do
it?
not, thank you.
Thank you. So that will bring us to number 30, Joanne.
That's great. Okay.
Are we ready? We'll
Mr. Chairman,
proceed.
the roll number is 0605-309-1700. The address is 30 Duran Road. The assessed value for 2020 is $1,192,000 at a working state of April 1st, 2018. There's one building on the property. It's a one-story building. The effective year built is 1988. The wall heights are 20 feet. The zoning is M2 manufacturing. The land area is 34,123. The plan area 11,680. With a leasable area of 11,759. And a land to plan area of 2.92. Again, I'll continue, before I go further into the brief, this is another property that I, when I first worked on my brief, there were some things I did not note, so I had actually reviewed when I received Mr. Borsham's brief, and there was actually also another recommendation I have on this one as well, actually, so. The recommendation I have made based on this property is, I was looking at the rent roll and the subject leases that are in place, and I noticed one of the model rents we had, one of them may have been a little high, so I had adjusted our model rents to the actuals. So I used, originally we had a 646 for an overall rent, and I've using the actuals, willing to accept the contract rents that Mr. Bursham has submitted as actuals in place at $6.25. And then the other correction or modification I had made was cap rate. We had originally a model cap rate of 6%. I felt was quite low or lower, so I have actually adjusted the cap rate again based on age, size, location. I felt the cap of 6.75 is more better representative of this property based on its age, size, and location. And with those two changes, I have an estimated market value of $1,024,000.
Thank you. Mr. Borgstrom, are you in agreement or not in opposition?
Let's treat this the same as we did the last property, where I'm not going to oppose this and won't present evidence, and will just leave our evidence as filed, subject to my confirmation and approval.
Thank you. Ms. Anderson, did you have any questions or concerns regarding that? No.
Other than it
So
went too
therefore,
fast.
sorry?
Other than it went too
Yeah,
fast?
so therefore, what we'll do is, we'll make our decision based on the evidence that's presented here. Thank you. Desire for summation for the three properties?
I think it was pretty, again, pretty self-explanatory. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That will conclude our hearing. Thank you both for your call, for your presentations, and the decisions will be forthcoming. I will call the hearing to a close.